Hello everyone, Joe McNamara here from the VAW-VRC Foundation. Welcome to this edition of the VAW-VRC Foundation World History Project. The goal of our project is to tell some of the great stories and accomplishments of the VAW-VRC community of naval aviation. Today we are honored to spotlight the restoration of two key spaces on the USS Midway Museum in San Diego that are critical to the VAW-VRC community. Our guest today and our interviewee is Master Chief Ken Borchik, who was instrumental and spearheaded the restoration of these two spaces. So Ken, thank you for being here today. It's great
Thanks
to talk to you. Tell us a little bit about your Navy career and about yourself.
Okay, so originally from Chicago. I spent about 27 years in the Navy all total. Started out working on T-28s, so that kind of dates me a long time ago. From there, went to VAW-120, where I first got introduced to this platform. I was in VAW-120 for about a year when I terminated shore duty, and the detailer said, okay, well, you got to go where the Navy needs you. Send me. And they sent me to VAW-115 here on board Midway. Spent 3 years here, then went on to VAW-110 as a FRAMP instructor. From there, I kind of had a little detour and I went to a LAMPS squadron, HSL 35. They decommissioned. I came back to the E2 community with VAW-117, and then I went back to Washington, D.C. as the AE rating assignment detailer. When I got done with that, I went to VRC 30 and was introduced pretty much to the COD platform. Did a full tour there, and then did several different staff and maintenance tours after that, wrapping up in 2007.
So tell me, what inspired you to take on these restoration projects?
It's a great question. So I had my retirement ceremony on the flight deck of Midway. Midway was always near and dear to my heart. It was my first real sea tour, time at sea. Created lifelong friends. People, a lot of the items you see in these spaces were donated by the very people that I served with. So it's important to honor the heritage and the legacy of not only our community but the people that served in this space. So how did it start? Great question. Several years ago, I was walking through the ship on a tour. My son's future mother and father-in-law were in town, and he and his fiance and his mother and father-in-law, we were all walking through the ship, and we came out of the captain's import galley here, and we came down this passageway, and when we did, this door was painted primer red. And I knew that door was our space, was our squadron avionics space. And I thought, gosh, that thing should at least reflect 115 avionics somehow. So I started a letter writing campaign to the ship and asked them, hey, will you let me paint the door? So they said yeah. And one Sunday morning, about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, myself and a real good friend of mine, Ted Miller, he just recently passed away. He and I came on the ship and we painted that door. We put the VAW-115 logo on there and really made it. This was the avionics space. Well, in order to do that, I had to get access to the space. And one of the docents unlocked the door for me, and the memories. As soon as I stepped into space, the memories just came flooding through.
Could you describe for some of our fans what happened in this space? What was the point of it?
Okay, so VAW-115 was E2 squadron. Back then it was E2Bs, and in maintenance back then in aviation maintenance, you had 3 levels of maintenance: organizational level, intermediate, and depot. All the squadrons were organizational level maintenance. So in this space, we would repair. For the electricians, you had ATs and AEs that worked out of this space. ATs worked on all the computers and the scopes and the computer type stuff, whereas the electricians, we worked on the navigation systems and the environmental systems, the power distribution, generation. So anything with a wire on it, that was ours.
And who would be in here on a typical work day at sea?
So usually in this space alone, you probably had about 12 people, about 6 people from each shift. Or normally 7 ATs and 5 AEs. It was a little bit, they were a little bit heavier on the AT side. And during general quarters, everybody would be in here, so it got really crowded really quick. So when I walked into space, there was like 3 inches of dirt on the floor. This space was gutted. The desks that were in here were not original to the space. This counter right here came out of our maintenance control. Another VAW space on board the ship. So it was important to me to try to get it as true to what the space looked like back in the day as it did.
Now, what time frame was this? When did you start this project?
Oh gosh. So I started working on the avionics space probably in 2017, late 2016, early 2017. And there was a guy that worked in restoration. His name was Dick Hallowell. He's passed on now. And he was my mentor. He was the guy that guided me and said, well, you can do this, you can't do this. And got me involved in ship's restoration, working with that department, which they've been absolutely phenomenal in being able to make any of this happen.
You obviously worked extremely hard to put it together, but you had a team. Can you talk about some of your team members?
So sure. The avionics space itself was almost a solo project.
Really?
So the ship's restoration department, their team painted it out. And that took some time. It takes a lot of time and energy to get paint where it needs to be. But I did have friends come in, shipmates of mine I had one guy that came out, a guy named Milt Hill. He came out from Pensacola, Florida for a day to help me out. Had some other folks that are friends of mine that would help me, come on board and move like the safes. The safes were underneath the desks at one point. They'd help me, shine metal and clean things, and then we had other friends like Mike Skelly, retired warrant officer, that helped coordinate getting a lot of the pieces that you see, the artifacts that you see in here.
So that's what I was going to ask next. Can you talk about some of the things that are in this space and why they're significant to the AT and AEs?
Absolutely. So the items that are in here, a lot of the toolboxes and the test sets and the test boxes, they're very time era specific. They're genuine to the time frame that we were looking at, right? The mid 80s. Got friends of mine that still work on naval installations that had access to stuff that was being thrown away. And instead of throwing away, we kind of saved it from the scrapyard and cleaned it up and threw it in here. There's books up here, needs modules. Those came from a guy that was stationed in this. He was in the squadron when I was here, but he worked in the eye level. And those are all books that he had saved since he was a young airman in the Navy. He's now the vice president of a firm in the Midwest, and he just wanted to make sure that those were here. He wanted to make sure that they came home, because he was on this ship when he completed those books. So anybody that was stationed here, if they were an AT, they probably had to do all those courses up there. So it does matter.
Now this behind me is near and dear to every NFO in the Navy E2 community. I always remember the ATs talking about humping these giant displays.
Sure, they're heavy.
What was it like to have to replace a main display unit, as they were called?
So being an AE, I was blessed I never had to, but I did help them carry these things up every now and then. This is from the older block aircraft. This is from the newer block aircraft. This one came out of Norfolk. This one was found in a. So yes, where we get the artifacts and pieces. This one came out of an old warehouse at North Island that there was like 3 of these on a pallet, and they were destined literally for the dumpster. The other 2 had all the film that's on the screen here had fallen in, so you could actually see through the CRT. This was the only one that wasn't. And I asked them if I could have it, and they were like, "Yeah, take it." So threw it in the back of the truck and got it up there. For a lot of these items that are super heavy, I had to get they had to use the crane to help lift it up onto the elevator, and then
Wow.
get it up to the flight deck level. How to get an L run.
Huh.
But some of these items, these test sets were donated from. There was a guy that I was stationed with on Constellation, a retired gunnery sergeant, and the company he works for in Colorado, he asked them, "Hey, we're throwing these things away. Do you mind if we just donate them?" And he sent them out to the ship. I actually sent them to my house, and I brought them on board. And those are, O-scopes and test sets that, we would have used. So once the word went out that I was looking for parts and pieces, it's amazing how stuff started showing up at my house, and I didn't ask a lot of questions.
For those of us who were in the officer community, we had the advantage of just showing up at the plane, systems were getting ready, were working,
Sure.
turn them on. But it's important for people to think about the busy hive of activity of all these hardworking guys like yourself.
Yeah.
Put all that together to make it happen so that you could go off and fly and do that mission.
So normally before you guys showed up on the flight deck, usually about 2 hours before a launch was scheduled, we would be up there. Have to get up there early as we could to make sure we get the power cables, because if the fighter guys were up there, they would take the power cables, and you just can't pull the cable out of their jet, because then they get upset, which has happened. But we needed 2 power cables for the E2, so we'd hook up the power cables, we get the vapor cycle online, we get the WA-20, all the the back end stuff primed and run up, and back in E2B, the navigation system. We had to sit there and watch this nulling needle go back and forth looking for 0.
Huh.
And as soon as it nulled out on 0, you hit operate, and then the pilots were pretty good for navigation after that.
How does spaces get allocated for squadrons, and why is that important?
Oh, that's an awesome question. So, on most carriers, the maintenance the squadrons will get together with the carrier air wing before deployment, and the carrier air wing will be allotted a certain number of spaces from the ship for their efforts. Because keep in mind, the ship is a conglomeration of both ship's company and the air wing itself. The unique thing for Midway is that the Midway and CAG-5 team were pretty much we were Midway. So we didn't change from ship to ship. We didn't go from air wing to a different ship, or it just didn't happen on Midway. We were all together. So this space has really been a VAW-115 Avionics space since 1967, 1968, when Midway went over to Japan in '73, and CAG-5 became the permanent forward deployed CAG, FDNF CAG. It was permanently assigned here, and CAG-5 didn't have to do the space wars with the ship, because we had these spaces already. That was a conversation that never had to take place, really. New spaces weren't being added, but they weren't being taken away either.
And this space was desirable for maintenance folks because...
Yeah, this space was perfect for the E2 squadron's avionics space, because these pieces of gear right here are super heavy. They're a couple 100 pounds. And when we get them from supply and we get them in the shop, we have to get them up to the flight deck to install them in the aircraft, or the ATs did. Some of the ATs aren't real strong, so they ask the AEs for help. Okay, I'm going to get beat up for that one. But the fact that we're on the O2 level and the flight deck is the O3 level, and we're one deck below the flight deck, that really made our life a lot easier by being able to just walk down the passageway and pop up on the flight deck and launch planes or fix planes or install these parts. So,
and it's just a short hop from your walking down the passageway to you're on the flight deck. We're close to.
It's 7 steps away.
Well, this is an amazing accomplishment in itself. But now we're going to move on to your next project, which you could argue is even more impressive than this great job. So now we're going to reconvene in a few minutes over at the air transfer office, and
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Live.
Okay, we just came from the Avionics Work Center. That was a very impressive restoration that, as they say, Ken spearheaded. But now we're in, perhaps you could say, even a more impressive space. Now we're in the air transfer office, sometimes known as the ATO shack. Ken, tell us about what the point of this space is and what its significance is.
Okay, sure. So the ATO, or transfer office, as you mentioned, is basically the air terminal for the ship. If somebody was flying onto the ship, or if somebody needed to fly off of the ship, whether it was they were transferring, or it was for medical reasons, or there was a humanitarian reason, a family member passed or whatever, and they had to leave the ship, it would be coordinated through this space.
Mm-hmm. So the first place you came after your aircraft landed, or the last place you exited as you got on the cod to?
It would be through this space, except for the DVs. Usually the DVs were taken through the captain's port cabin.
This is where the workers, everybody
Right.
who's coming and going from the ship. I think a lot of people don't realize how much traffic there is from people coming from shore and going to shore in a normal day in a carrier. So this is a really important space. Tell me what it was like to find this place after it had been, left fallow for many years and get to work.
So sure. So when I completed the Avionics Work Center, and I became more active in the VAW-VRC Foundation, I really took to heart the mission statement, that what the foundation of our foundation is all about. Is the heritage, and it's the legacy, and it's the education of people to what our community provided for the fleet. And the Avionics Work Center is literally 7 steps away from where we're at right now. And I thought, well, you know what, this ATO space, I could restore that space and tie that into the VRC community, because although there were other platforms that certainly supported an ATO on board any carrier, for USS Midway, VRC 50 was the go-to, because we were FD&F, we were forward deployed naval forces, and VRC 50, then stationed in Japan, or the Philippines, or then later Guam, they would always provide support to the ship. So I reached out to the foundation. I said, hey, I got an idea. It's going to take about a year, maybe a little bit more. Would you be interested in doing this? And the foundation voted on it, and they said, yeah, they'd be interested in that. Then I had to bring it to the ship, and the ship had to approve it, which they did. And again, restoration was very, very supportive. The engineering department was very supportive of this effort, so we really appreciate that.
Tell me about the team you assembled to put this all together.
Great question. So when I first started working on the ATO space, it was the level of work that had to take place was really overwhelming, and I knew I needed help. The avionics space, I just kind of took it as a personal. I was going to do as much of that as I could myself, but I knew coming into this work, this effort, I needed to expedite it. I needed to get help. So I reached out to some folks that I knew. One of them was a guy named Joe Tipton. He's a retired Chief Petty Officer, and he and I served in VRC 30 together. So he's got a tie-in to the community. And another person was Jeff Kabizna, a retired AD1, and he was in VRC 50 twice. So he's got a tie-in, and he's got a personal stake in this as well, this effort. And for the better part of a year, almost every weekend, the three of us came into this space, and we just really, banged it out. We had to put a whole new deck in here, a whole new floor. Had to lay new tile, all the metal. We had to manufacture the counter, which was falling apart, and create a display for people to really see what kind of aircraft supported the ATO mission.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the interesting things about this space is you can look around the walls and see pictures of distinguished visitors over the years. Really quite an impressive display. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I started this effort, I wanted to do a little bit of homework, and I asked the curatorial services, ship's library, if they had a list of distinguished visitors or VIPs that had come aboard Midway. And they said, yeah, we do. And they provided a spreadsheet to me with thousands of names. I mean, there were a couple thousand names on there easy. And that spreadsheet supported everything from 1945, 1946, up until the decommissioning in 1992. So I had to make a cut at a certain thing, so we kind of went with 3-star and above, as far as who came out here and who visited the ship. But if you look at some of these images, Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope,
I'm looking behind you, I see Lord Mountbatten.
Right, absolutely.
And, well, it really does talk, as you were saying, about the legacy and the history of the community. So,
right.
It's easy to be starstruck by celebrities, but it's more, I guess, important to also just realize the daily traffic of sailors, pilots, NFOs, people from the ship.
So imagine you're a junior sailor and you just get the word that your mom or dad, you're underway, you're in the middle of the ocean, and you just get word that your mom and your dad pass. It's the Navy always takes care of their own, has always taken care of their own. So they want to get them home if it's possible, if it's operationally allowable. They will do everything they can to get them back, so they can spend time with their loved ones. And this would be the space that would generate that. That would be the first call. Hey, TO, do you have a seat on a cod today? Well, the cod's full. Bump somebody. Yeah. This kid, he's got to go home. This sailor or this Marine has got to get out of here. So then you do the communication through, leadership to make sure that people are prioritized according to, what their situation is, and you get them out of here.
Wow. And then also, it's an important entry point for critical parts and things for keeping the ship.
Well, the biggest reason for the COD is to bring parts to support the mission of the aircraft. But for the sailor and the Marine, that people that are stationed on the ship, the biggest piece is the mail. Yeah. So I can't impress upon anybody the importance of that call that came over the 1MC. Hey, COD on the ball, 2,000 pounds of pony, on the ball, and for everybody listening, pony is what we called mail. So when we heard that there was, a couple thousand pounds of letters coming on board, it just brought everybody's spirits up. Because when you're at sea, there's 2 times a day, before mail call and after mail call, right? So if you got a letter, you didn't even care if it was from Dean's photo filler. You got a piece of mail, right? So this space was absolutely critical in maintaining the morale of sailors and Marines while they were deployed.
That's a great point. Thanks, Ken. I think we just have to step back for a second and just recognize the volunteers and people like you who do that extra effort to bring something special, not just to our community, but really to anybody who's interested in naval aviation and visits the Midway or anything related to it. So I can't congratulate you enough on this fantastic effort you put on, and I just want to say thank you for coming aboard today and telling us about your efforts. If there's anything you'd like to say to kind of bring us home, please feel free.
Well, thank you very much. I do appreciate it, and I appreciate the platform, but it is about the team. It's never been about me as a person. It's never been, when I started the avionics space, the work center, it was about the guys that I served with in the VAW-115 in the avionics space. I could probably tell you where 75-80% of those people are right now today, just because, we became friends. I mean, we really, knew each other. And then as we grew into the ATO space, and we've got sea story after sea story about both of these spaces. And I welcome anybody that comes out to San Diego. Give me a call ahead of time. These are behind the scene tours for the ship, but I've got the key, so give the foundation a call, and we can make sure that somebody's here to open the space up for you.
That's a great idea. I want to just say that this typifies some of the things that the foundation is doing, and it really brings it home when you see the concrete realization of such a great vision that you had. I also want, before we close, I want to say thanks to our producer, photographer, editor, Dave Doherty, who's standing by always taking care of making us look good. Ken, great great job with this and so many other things you do. Thank you again for coming aboard. And
Appreciate
great
your
job.
time.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.